This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories. China says that it's ready to work with the US to bring more stability to a volatile world, setting the stage for this week's high-stakes Trump-Xi summit in Beijing. Now, South Korea is vowing action after a Korean-operated cargo ship was attacked in the Strait of Hormuz last week, sparking a fire in its engine room. Seoul says it will respond once the attacker is identified. Totally unacceptable. Well, that's President Donald Trump's response to Iran's counter-proposal for ending the Middle East war, raising concerns of renewed conflict after weeks of negotiations. And China's factory gate inflation climbs to a near four-year high in April as Middle East tensions drive up energy costs and extend the turnaround from deflation. Also tonight, artificial intelligence is supercharging China's booming microdrama industry, but there is a dark side. Human actors are among the first to get the axe. Greater stability in a volatile world. Well, that's what China says it's seeking with the US when their leaders hold a summit this week. Beijing has confirmed President Donald Trump will be visiting from Wednesday to Friday, marking the first trip by a US leader since 2017. Now, Washington calls the summit highly symbolic, but beyond the optics, tough issues are on the table. Both sides looking to ease pressure on tariffs and export controls on tech and rare earths. The latest irritant in the relationship? America's war on Iran, an important oil supplier to China. Mr. Trump had delayed the trip to focus on the war, which has driven up petrol prices at home and is widely unpopular. And Mr. Trump's second-term return to Beijing will be a full state visit, including a visit to the Temple of Heaven and a lavish state banquet. The White House says talks will focus on economic cooperation and creating a new board of trade to keep both sides engaged on key industries such as energy, aerospace, and agriculture. And for the latest, let's bring in CNA correspondent Han Si-hui live from Beijing. So plenty to talk about for both these leaders, but what will be the top of the agenda at this summit?
Plenty to talk about. Indeed, this will be a high-stakes meeting, not just for the two countries, but for the rest of the world, given the global situation. At Beijing, it's not going to be diplomatic, not just going to be diplomatic protocol, a signing of agreements. It's going to be two top leaders of the world, two top superpowers. They're going to have direct engagement as well as direct dialogue.
习近平主席将同特朗普总统就事关中美关系以及世界和平与发展的重大问题深入交换意见。元首外交对中美关系具有不可替代的战略引领作用，中方愿同美方一道，秉持平等、尊重、互惠的精神，扩大合作，管控分歧，为变乱交织的世界注入更多的稳定性和确定性。
Well, top issues include the Iran war, which Mr. Trump is expected to press Mr. Xi on China's approach. Now, Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry has already said that China's approach remains consistent and it wants to prevent the resumption of war. Now, China is also calling on the U.S. to stop its sanctions on Chinese companies in its so-called enabling of Iran's military operations. Now, trade is also going to feature highly at these talks. Mr. Trump expected to bring a delegate of businessmen, American businessmen, especially as invitations have already been sent to CEOs of Boeing, Nvidia, MasterCard, but none of these CEOs have responded saying that they would come to China just yet. Now, the Taiwan issue also likely to feature at these talks, possibly, although analysts say that the status quo will likely still be maintained. China likely to call on the U.S. to stop its selling of weapons to Taiwan. The U.S. also calling on China to stop its military actions at the Taiwan island.
And so we are also hearing that there are these trade talks in Seoul, which will take place tomorrow, just a day before Mr. Trump heads to China. What can we expect from that?
That's right. So the real negotiation could already be happening just before Mr. Trump is coming to Beijing with these talks at South Korea set to serve as groundwork before his arrival. So on tariffs, China is likely to prioritize to try and secure a lower tariff by offering concessions on the one hand, possibly catering to Mr. Trump's demands, while at the other hand, a willingness to retain and retaliate on others. Trade also likely to feature with China set to purchase the 3 Bs, soybeans, beef, as well as Boeing aircraft. But again, analysts are saying that any concrete outcomes from these talks are going to be modest, especially with a distracted U.S. in the Iran war. Any kind of wide-ranging deal will possibly be prevented. And so China is likely to go into these talks with very limited expectations.
Hey, many thanks for that report. CNA correspondent Han Sihui live in Beijing. Taiwan officials say they are confident ties with the U.S. will remain stable. Its foreign minister says Washington has repeatedly assured Taipei that there will be no change in U.S. policy towards the island. But he also hopes that there would not be any unwanted surprises. Cross-strait tensions have grown over the past decade. Beijing sees Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party as separatists and has piled on diplomatic and military pressure. The DPP rejects China's sovereignty claims and insists that Taiwan's future can only be decided by its people. Now, China's near daily military drills near Taiwan, along with exercises simulating a blockade, have ratcheted up tensions. While Washington does not formally recognize Taiwan, it is legally bound to help Taiwan defend itself, especially by providing weapons, a commitment that angers Beijing. And for more insights into what's at stake at the Leaders' Summit, I'm going to be speaking with Wang Huiyao later this hour. He is the founder of the Center for China and Globalization and a former counselor of China's State Council. The U.S. has rejected Iran's counter-proposal aimed at ending the war, deepening doubts over the future of the fragile ceasefire. Donald Trump issued that response just hours after Tehran delivered its response through Pakistani mediators.
In an online post, Trump said that, quote, "I have just read the response from Iran's so-called representatives. I don't like it, totally unacceptable." Iran's state news agency said Tehran's demands include an immediate end to the war, a halt to the U.S. naval blockade, guarantees against further attacks, and the lifting of all sanctions, including the U.S. ban on Iranian oil. Shortly after Trump's post, the Iran state news agency quoted a source saying that Trump's reaction, quote, "doesn't matter at all," and that no one in Iran drafts plans to please the U.S. president. It all followed an earlier U.S. proposal to end fighting in a limited pact that puts off harder issues like Iran's nuclear program. Trump has been under pressure to draw a line under the war, which has set off a global energy crisis. After the start of the war, Iran blockaded the Strait of Hormuz, which had carried a fifth of the world's oil supply. Sunday's news came after hostile drones were spotted over multiple Gulf countries despite the month-long ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran and breaking 48 hours of relative calm. However, 2 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz on Sunday. Data from shipping firm Kepler showed one of them was a Qatari liquid natural gas tanker. Sources said it was heading for Pakistan to offer some relief after a wave of power blackouts caused by stymied imports of gas, and that the transfer was an Iranian show of goodwill to Pakistan and Qatar, who are both involved in mediating peace talks. Clashes have also continued in southern Lebanon between Israel and the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah, despite a U.S.-brokered ceasefire weeks ago. The latest talks between Israel and Lebanon are due to start in Washington on Thursday.
South Korea has condemned in the strongest terms an attack on one of its cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Well, Namu is operated by South Korean carrier HMM and was struck a week ago while stranded in the vital waterway. A forensic analysis found the impact triggered a fire in its engine room. Authorities say the ship was not in violation of any regulations. South Korea's national security advisor says the attack cannot be justified, and Seoul will respond when it finds out who is responsible. Now, US President Donald Trump has accused Iran of carrying out the strike, a claim Tehran denies. Meanwhile, Japan's industry ministry says a tanker carrying crude from Azerbaijan will arrive as early as tomorrow, marking its first import of Central Asian fuel since the war began. Tokyo is working to diversify its energy supplies away from the Middle East as the Strait of Hormuz is effectively cut off. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has said that Japan would begin releasing 20 days' worth of oil reserves this month. Separately, Beijing has voiced strong opposition to U.S. sanctions on 3 China-based satellite companies accused of supporting Iran's military operations.
中方坚决反对没有国际法依据、未经联合国安理会授权的非法单边制裁。我们一贯要求中国企业依法依规开展业务，将坚定维护本国企业的正当权益。
Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, South Korea's Kospi surges to another record high, emerging as the world's best performer on AI boom. Plus, top European oil majors pocket billions as oil prices swing because of the war on Iran. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time to catch up with Roland Lim, who is standing by with the very latest in business news. And let's focus our attention on South Korea's stock market, apparently sprinting to another record high today.
Yeah, the Korean market is really emerging as one of the world's best performers. Retail investors have started to pile in, and authorities are urging them not to take on too much risk. But they appear unstoppable, riding a fresh wave of AI-fueled optimism, helping the Kospi sprint past the 7,800 level for the very first time. Heavyweight Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix led the charge, rising 6.3% and 11.5% respectively, with both chip makers hitting lifetime peaks. Early exports data also showing the AI enthusiasm. South Korea's exports in the first 10 days of the month rose 44% on year, while imports increased 15%. Goldman Sachs says there's more room for growth. The U.S. investment bank has raised its 12-month Kospi target to 9,000 points, one of the highest among major brokerages. The index has gained some 35% this month alone, and more than 80%, I should say, so far this year. Goldman says the rally isn't just momentum-driven. It points to the semiconductor age of semiconductor memory cycle, AI demand, as well as the government's Value Up program as drivers of a broader market re-rating. The bank forecasts Korean earnings will jump some 300% this year. That's the strongest in Asia since the post-99 crisis rebound. That compares with a 45% growth for Taiwan. That's another tech-heavy market Goldman has also upgraded. Meantime, South Korea's finance minister striking an upbeat note on the country's economic outlook, supported by surging global demand for semiconductors. Mr. Koo Yoon-chol says that he expects the country's economic growth to exceed 2% this year, adding that the exact pace would depend on the chip cycle and the war in the Middle East. Now, Mr. Koo pointed to strong exports, up 48% in April, driving a roughly 24 billion trade surplus. The current account surplus in March also hitting a record $37.3 billion. At the same time, the finance minister flagged inflation and the property market as key near-term risks, and as well as top policy priorities. Japan's Nikkei also touching a record high earlier today before ending the day lower as the Middle East crisis outweighed optimism over corporate earnings and tech investment. The benchmark Nikkei 225 fell 0.5%. The Japanese yen is also starting the week weaker ahead of U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's visit to Japan today. Now, he's set to meet with the country's top officials after Japan's suspected forex intervention last week. Markets are watching for his comments that may help boost the yen and to slow its slide. Some are also speculating a coordinated U.S.-Japan intervention in the currency markets. Remember, in January, Besant called for faster rate hikes from the Bank of Japan to help support the currency. The U.S. also conducted an unusual rate check, which was widely seen as a prelude to possible coordinated intervention. For Japan, the weak currency makes its oil imports more expensive at a time of higher energy prices due to the Iran war. And this has increased the chances of a rate hike from the BOJ next month. But it's also complicated by Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, who has been an advocate of lower interest rates. China's factory inflation hitting a 45-month high, I should say, while consumer inflation also increased on higher energy costs from the Iran war. Producer prices gained some 2.8% on year last month, extending its first positive reading in March after more than 3 years. Consumer prices increased 1.2% on year. Now, while this has snapped the country out of deflation, economists warn that inflation due to higher import costs and not domestic demand could hurt the economy. This could squeeze corporate profit margins, and weigh on growth and to limit the room for stimulus. It also complicates the situation for policymakers who have promised to boost domestic demand and to curb market competition. Let's take a look at how the markets reacted. Chinese stock markets closed at an 11-year high today, but that was mainly driven by a tech rally. The Shanghai Composite was up more than 1% at a level not seen since June of 2015. Shenzhen, the second bourse, did better. It's up 2.2% for the day. And in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index closing largely flat. Thomas Rupp from VP Bank says that China's inflation may be improving, but the recovery remains uneven. He said domestic consumption, which is a key growth component of the economy, remains weak.
From a cost-push inflation side means the higher energy prices are having an impact. That's what we also see now, especially on the corporates itself. On the consumers, it's still a mixed picture. So we have been seeing export figures coming out over the weekend, which have surprised to the upside again, thanks to the AI cycle. And on the other hand, consumption still relatively weak itself. I think that's also where, at the end, it's not going to bring China out of deflation from today to tomorrow, but it's a positive sign that at least we get some improvements, especially also on the anti-involution side. So it's not all purely from the oil shock itself. I think that's also where we see a partial pass-through on the CPI side, but it's still relatively muted, especially if you take out the food inflation side, which is still very much under control within China itself.
Oil prices pulling back somewhat after rallying as much as 4% in Asian trade as uncertainty around the US-Iran conflict continues to hang over global energy flows. Both Brent crude and the West Texas Intermediate are currently up by about 2%, $103.40 a barrel for Brent. US market, the West Texas Intermediate is $97.32. Last week, both contracts recorded 6% weekly losses on hopes for an imminent end to the 10-year conflict. But those hopes were thwarted after President Trump rejected Tehran's response to a U.S. peace proposal, calling it totally unacceptable and accusing Iran of playing games. The impasse between the U.S. and Iran and the threat of prolonged disruption to the Strait of Hormuz are feeding into heightened price sensitivity in the broader energy markets. Our data from Kepler shows that Qatar was allowed to send its first shipment of LNG through the Strait of Hormuz since the war began. Now, this is a lifeline for energy crisis-stricken Pakistan and builds confidence in negotiations. President Trump is under pressure to end the war, which is already into its third month, ahead of his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Saudi oil giant Aramco warns, though, that it'll take months for energy markets to normalize, with nearly 1 million barrels of oil lost since the war began on February 28th. The world's largest oil company, Aramco, benefited from higher energy prices due to the Middle East conflict. A first quarter net profit rose nearly 26% on year to $32 billion, beating market expectations. Aramco says it was able to deliver millions of barrels of crude daily through its massive east to west pipeline, which bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. CEO Amin Nasser says the pipeline is now running at its full capacity of 7 million barrels per day to help mitigate the war's impact on global energy supplies. But that's still a fraction of Aramco's normal oil production levels, which stood at 11 million barrels per day in the fourth quarter of 25. Kerry Craig of JP Morgan Asset Management echoes Saudi Aramco's warning that energy markets may take time to rebalance from the oil shock, even if oil flows from the Strait of Hormuz resuming soon.
I think the real issue here is that, it's going to be a few more weeks from now, and suddenly you're going to hit that point where the amount of oil that's actually in the global economy that's required to just keep things running, that operational level or that floor for the amount of oil there will be reached. So far we've seen other measures that have been taken to try and offset that supply shock that we have seen come through. But, if we're running out of oil elsewhere because the strait is not open, suddenly that shortfall is going to jump quite significantly, and that can have a big impact on where oil prices to go. So we're very sensitive to the fact that we aren't past what could be still a prolonged period of oil that sits around $100 a barrel. But once it does start to get flowing, once we do see the oil maybe come through in a managed reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, you will see those pressures ease off a little bit. But our expectation is that the oil price is going to maintain some of that risk premium. It is going to sit sort of closer to $90 a barrel over the course of this year. And so it is going to have that inflationary consequence. So I think the central banks around the world are certainly focused on that. It does create more of a drag on growth, but the starting point for many parts of the world was pretty strong. And I think you're seeing it in terms of the consumer in many parts of the world, the fact that we have higher interest rates that allow for central banks to be a bit more balanced when they look at their outlook. And we are seeing that momentum in the economy offset some of that drag. So it's not necessarily a recessionary scenario, but it does amplify some of the risks around that growth and inflation. Our base case is still for that we do see that strait reopening. We do start to get some of that energy reflowing. And so those pressures will be less intense, but it is a very fragile situation. So we are focusing on quality growth in a portfolio and ensuring we have the right amounts of diversification and hedging to take away some of that risk.
And as oil markets swing on every comment, denial or warning from Washington and Tehran, Europe's oil majors have reportedly earned billions in extra profits from the volatility. Analysts estimate that the continent's three biggest oil companies scooped up $4.75 billion more in the first quarter from the previous 3 months. The war on Iran has disrupted energy flows and caused the oil prices to whipsaw. Physical prices of Brent, which was trading at below $60 back in January, shot up to more than $144 a barrel in April. Since the start of the war, shares of oil majors BP and Total have risen more than 10%, while Shell is up around 1.4% due to its exposure to infrastructure in the Gulf. And you're up to date with the business news at this hour.
Thanks as always, Roland. Right, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, all eyes on arguably the biggest meeting this year as Donald Trump and Xi Jinping try to cool tensions. We're going to be speaking with an expert for more on what's at stake in just a moment. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea condemns an attack on one of the cargo ships in the strongest terms, vowing a firm response once it identifies those responsible. Officials say the ship struck in waters off the UAE was not in violation of any rules. China's factory gate inflation climbs to a 45-month high in April as Middle East tensions drive up energy costs and extend the turnaround from deflation. Also, China says it is ready to work with the U.S. to bring more stability to a volatile world, setting the stage for this week's high-stakes Trump-Xi summit in Beijing. Mr. Trump postponed the visit in March to focus on the Iran war. Locals and the American community in Beijing are cautiously optimistic, hoping that it will warm ties between the world's two largest economies. CNA's Tan Si-Hui reports from Beijing.
It was a lavish welcome for U.S. President Donald Trump when he first set foot in China nearly a decade ago. Chinese President Xi Jinping hosted Mr. Trump to a private tour of the Forbidden City. It was winter, but the mood was warm. Mr. Trump hailed his great chemistry with Mr. Xi and called the Chinese leader a very special man. Lawyer and chairman of China's American Chamber of Commerce, James Zimmerman, has lived and worked in China for the last 28 years.
I think there was, as always, a sense of optimism.
But that optimism soon vanished. Upon returning home, Mr. Trump wasted no time to wage a trade war against China, punishing the country for what he called unfair trade practices. China retaliated, leading to a full economic showdown in the years that followed.
After his visit in 2017, but we had an environment where there was more talk of decoupling and more talk of, competition between, the U.S. and China. And then when Trump took office last year, there was more talk about using tariffs.
We have tremendous national security because of tariffs.
Within the first 100 days of his return to the White House, Mr. Trump picked up where he left off and upped the ante on Beijing and the rest of the world. It marked one of the most aggressive phases of economic confrontation between the two powers. While trade is expected to dominate discussions when Mr. Trump returns to Beijing, analysts believe President Xi will balance pragmatism with a defensive posture, especially as Mr. Trump's war on Iran triggers a global energy crisis.
I don't think that there's much China can do on the war itself, but on the Hormuz bottleneck, I think it is still there, and also China is anxious to see the solution of this bottleneck. So I do think that both leaders will try their best to work out a plan to solve the problem.
I'm here at the Temple of Heaven, where Mr. Trump is expected to tour on the second day of his visit here in Beijing. Both sides have just announced that Mr. Trump will visit China from the 13th to 15th of May. The confirmation from Beijing came only days before the scheduled trip, consistent with its tightly controlled approach to diplomacy. Some locals I spoke with say they're hopeful of what his visit brings.
对于我们老百姓来说，要有改变是最好的，能够促进两国的发展。
他来访问肯定有好的。
But not everyone is excited.
我讨厌他。中国人民都是喜欢和平的，但是他说话就是不转说。对话总比争斗好吧？也希望他访华，挽回一下我们大国与大国之间的关系。但是对他我们不抱太多的希望。
Mr. Zimmerman of AmCham, meanwhile, hopes the Beijing reunion acts as a catalyst for a reset in U.S.-China relations.
This 2026 is an opportunity for both leaders to actually be visionary, in a sense that they'll change the path that the relationship has been taking for the last 10 years and move it in a direction where we will see more engagement, more dialogue, more of a discussion that manages the competition and challenges between the two sides.
One key indicator will be whether Mr. Xi reciprocates with a visit to Washington later this year. Tan Sihui, CNA, Beijing.
And for more analysis on the much-anticipated summit, we are joined now by Wang Huiyao, founder of the Center for China and Globalization and former counselor of the China State Council. And he's speaking to us from Beijing. Well, thanks, Dr. Wang, for joining us in East Asia tonight. First up, I just want to pick up on just how before Trump and Xi meet, the officials are already going to be talking. And we've got U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent. He says that economic security is national security, going to the meeting in Seoul. So what deliverables should we be expecting from this summit?
No, I think this summit is very significant. It's it's almost a decade time since Trump come this second time to visit Beijing, and also I think that economic security is also very important. People realize that now, so that China can provide the biggest economic security for not only China's-U.S. relation but for the world. So I think the mere picture of President Trump and President Xi shaking hands in Beijing And that's going to send 1,000 words around the world. And then U.S. and China, two largest economies, are getting together. And then probably with U.S.-China relation going to get into a new normal, which we both recognize. We have achieved a mutually assured destruction, so we have to avoid that. Then we have to assure mutually assured construction, so that it's going to be beneficial for both U.S. and China and world, particularly for the war going on in Iran and Ukraine and all those uncertainty. And then U.S.-China meeting together is a great way to increase certainty and reduce uncertainty. And both countries are really can reach some consensus to end the war and also provide the global world to really something to watch for. And this is so important, this significant visit.
No, and Dr. Wang, as you've mentioned, the last time President Trump came, that was back in 2017. I mean, the optics were great, but the aftermath of that was actually a trade war. So what's going to be different this time around?
Well, I think this time is quite different than last time. Last time, China was on the receiving end of, China GDP is much less than U.S. Now it's almost, 70% now. China's GDP has gone up almost doubled since last decade. And China also, as I said, has achieved a reciprocal counter ability with any sanction from U.S. So both countries realize they cannot really, take the hard approach. So I think economically they're going to have many things to achieve. Probably this time they're going to have a trade board bilaterally and also investment board between China and the U.S. That is great. That's going to see we can have a regular mechanism on both government to tackle those issues regularly, and also we can secure maybe a stable trade relations, and then we can find out ways to maybe have some low-hanging fruit resolved, like fentanyl. I mean, there's a lot of issues that has been taken on precursors, illegal doing that in China, but also U.S. is cracked down on the drug cartels in Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, and Latin America. So I think this 10% of a fentanyl tariff, could be dropped if they really reach out a good deal. And also there's a visa. U.S. is the last G7 country didn't get a free visa from China. If it works well, that could be achieved as well. And also one of the lowest hanging fruit is why not resume the consulate general for both in Chengdu and Houston? That was shut down during the first term of Trump. With this second time, they could probably revive that. So I see many things they can be doing together. But most important, of course, this their consensus and their similar position on how to contain this war or ending this war in Iran and even Russia war in Ukraine would be crucial. But of course, most important is Taiwan. I mean, that's the core interest of China. And China always wants to, why not, if you don't support, independence, why not say you're against independence or support peaceful unification? I think there's many things can be talked about. There's a great deal on the table that both leaders can talk.
And Dr. Wang, I just want to pick up on something that you've said before, and that is China could be a quiet promoter of peace in the Iran crisis. So if President Trump raises, which he probably will, raise the issue with President Xi at the summit, what do you think President Xi can realistically offer, you see? But because there are limits also of China's leverage there.
Well, I think China has a huge leverage. China is the largest trading partner of all Gulf countries and import 90% of petroleum from Iran. I mean, China has even though it's quiet behind, but China has a heavy weight in saying things if they do speak out as well. And actually, China has already spoke out. China Foreign Minister Wang has phoned over 30 foreign ministers and counterpart in the last 2 months. And China just had the Iranian foreign minister in Beijing told that the war cannot continue and Hormuz, China has to be open. That's a very strong message before Trump visit. I think what this can be done is that because China is the biggest trading partner, and then both sides, U.S. and Iran, they don't want to fight anymore. They really need a ladder to calm down. They need a stair to gracefully calm down. And China and Beijing provide that kind of platform. And it's great time and also occasion and very good timely to say that war is finished. The way is going to end with a significant visit to Beijing. So I think this visit is so significant, and it's probably both sides wants to give face to Beijing to really calm down. Because they want to calm down, they just need a platform to calm down, and Beijing can provide that platform.
And just talking about Taiwan again remains the sharpest flashpoint. Some are saying that Beijing will ask Trump to denounce independence, and support peaceful reunification. But, given how Trump is always transactional, that's his style, what will China be willing to offer in return for, say, stronger language from Washington?
I think Trump has said very clearly in his inaugural speech last year, he wants to be a president of peace and a president of a union. And so now we are now seeing that happening. He's involved. He hasn't been successful in mediating the Russian war in Ukraine, hasn't been successful getting out of a mess that he's stuck into Iran. And those things are really, China is probably the biggest variable there that can help move the needles around, and so that he will take this opportunity to do that. But on the other hand, Taiwan is an issue that 184 countries recognize that Taiwan is part of China and do not support independence. Why not say they are against independence, or let's say promote support peaceful unification? So that's not a big question to ask. I think the stability, status quo is important, but let's have a peace. So support the peace. That's a great message I think Trump can achieve. And of course, China also support peace for Middle East and Russian and Ukraine. So I think there's a much bigger peace Trump wants. That China also wants peace with peaceful communication with Taiwan, and Trump should support that.
Many thanks for your insights on U.S.-China relations. Appreciate your time and thoughts. Wang Huiyao, founder of Center for China and Globalization and also former counselor of China State Council. And we do have more coverage of U.S.-China ties. You can log on to our website, cna.asia, or our mobile app for commentaries, such as this one on 3 things Asia will be watching for when Trump and Xi meet in Beijing. Time now for a break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, can China's first AI-made movie inject new life into the box office? Our senior correspondent Han Yu-Guan joins us with a live report. Box office figures for China's Labor Day holiday period are out, and it's a mixed bag. The 5-day holiday raked in about 759 million yuan, or $111 million US. That's about 1.5% higher than last year. But still just about half of the 2024 Labor Day takings, a sign that consumers in China remain cautious. And for more on this, CNA senior correspondent Han Yu-Guan joins us live from Shanghai. Now, Yu-Guan, I believe you're just outside a cinema. It looks quite quiet at the moment, but in general, Chinese consumers are really cutting back, are they? It's just a sign of weak spending overall.
Well, at least for the holiday period, not exactly. The number of tickets sold actually rose about 10% from last year. But the average ticket price fell about 8% to around 36 yuan, or about $5 US. So box office takings only edged up because of that. So what's interesting is that people are still spending, but just not always at cinemas. Official figures show there were about 32,000 commercial performances over the holidays, bringing in nearly 2.5 billion yuan. That's more than 3 times the cinema box office takings. Singer-songwriter Xu Liang, for example, held 5 straight shows in Chengdu. Local media citing the venue said nearly 9 in 10 concertgoers traveled from outside Chengdu. So consumers are spending on experiences that feel social, immersive, and shareable. For cinemas, that is a problem, because a movie is now not just competing with other movies, it's competing with concerts, travel, games, live streams, microdramas, you name it. Oteli?
But what's also interesting to note is that China has approved its first AI-made movie for theaters. Is that going to be a game changer? Could next year be different?
Well, that movie you mentioned is San Xing Dui, The Future Past. For those unfamiliar, San Xing Dui is an archaeological dig that revealed a mysterious ancient civilization in Sichuan known for its giant bronze masks. Now, this animated film is linking the ancient world to a sci-fi future. It is being promoted as one of China's first cinematic film with deep AI involvement. That's important because it means AI is moving from the virtual world into the real world cinema. For that firm, AI is really showing its worth. It's remaking a long-lost civilization and envisioning a future we haven't yet seen. It shows that AI can open the door to projects that were previously too complicated or too expensive to make. But whether it can make movies that audiences care about, we'll have to wait and see. After all, we are already seeing Chinese consumers turning away from cinema to other experiences that bring them more emotional value, such as concerts, for example. So content really is still king.
So tell us more about how, AI, I'm sure it's reshaping China's microdrama industry one way or another.
Well, indeed it is. For those unfamiliar, microdramas are short dramas made for mobile viewing. Episodes can be just a few minutes long. Because many of them follow a familiar format, they are especially vulnerable to AI disruption. Already by one count, there were about 128,000 AI microdramas or comic-style dramas in circulation by the end of February. Some are doing well. Xinhua reported that one AI-generated microdrama, Feng Shui Tianshi, crossed 100 million views within 12 hours on Douyin. That shows you just how fast this format can travel, especially when the content is visual. Fantasy, sci-fi, historical worlds, elaborate costumes, big effects. AI is good at producing that kind of spectacle cheaply. Oteli?
I'd imagine, Yuguan, if I was an actor or, working in the film industry, I'm going to be pretty worried about AI taking over my job. Should I then be worried?
Well, the official message from the industry is that AI is here to empower creators, not replace them. And that is partly true, but the labor concern is real. The top stars and directors are untouched for now, but those in the middle or lower tiers, especially those in microdramas, are already losing their jobs in droves. Here's what they're saying on social media. Take a listen.
朋友们真的已是寒冬了，今年相对于去年来说，戏少了很多，特别是短剧会遭受到了很大的重创。众所周知，因为咱这边 AI 的一个更新迭代，
这个状况就是很突然，感觉一夜之间这个大家都失业了，恐怖程度呢堪比疫情。
我从过完年到现在，一部短剧都没有接到。中腰部演员几乎集体失业。
我好不容易干了3个月，从群演到特约到角色，好不容易熬出头了，然后短剧行业崩了。我直接就是跑路了，我去干了前台，这是我的工作，我刚下班。然后我看我们朋友圈，我看有的说要去广州送外卖。
Oteli, you can really hear the anguish there, isn't it? Microdramas became a hit genre just a couple of years ago. For some of these folks, microdramas was their quick ticket to fulfill their dreams of acting as a living. But just as quickly, their dreams have now been dashed by AI.
Yeah, it was really quite depressing and moving to hear, these actors losing their jobs to AI. So then, does that mean that AI, in effect, is likely to sweep the rest of China's entertainment industry?
Well, that seems like the trend, isn't it? In microdramas, you're already seeing AI content flooding the market. But are they capturing eyeballs? That's the question. Industry reporting suggests among over 100,000 AI works now online, only about 0.1% crossed the 100 million view mark. That's low by Chinese standards. So AI can flood the market, but it cannot guarantee a hit. What's more, how some of those views come about can be quite questionable because some industry insiders are saying that the buying of advertising or online marketing can take up to 90% of the total production cost. Imagine that. So only about 10% is invested into making the content. So will cinema go the same way? Well, here's food for thought. Over the holidays, the top 2 films accounted for more than 60% of the box office. One was Han Zhan 1994 or Cold War 1994, helped by familiar names from Hong Kong, especially in the crime film genres like Chow Yun-fat, Aaron Kwok, Tony Leung. But the top earner was 消失的人 or missing persons, a suspense firm that caught up from behind. How did it get there? Well, the crime suspense firm got there by word of mouth. That suggests people will still pay for films they think are worth it. So a big screen is not enough. They need big stars, big emotions, big stories, which will drive good reviews. So the question is not about what tool is being used to make a movie, it's about how well a movie can move people to buy a ticket at the box office like the one behind me. So for the survival of cinemas like this one in Shanghai, that is really the real question.
All right. Well, that's been a really interesting topic on AI disruption. Thanks so very much to CNA's senior correspondent Han Yuguan, live from Shanghai. Hey, in other news, China's cargo spacecraft Tianzhou-10 has docked with its Tiangong space station, resupplying extended stay for its astronauts. The Long March 7 rocket carrying the cargo craft blasted off at 8:14 a.m. local time from Hainan province, and it's loaded with critical supplies, consumables for the crew, and payloads for scientific experiments.
天舟10号货运飞船已准确进入预定轨道，太阳帆板展开，工况正常。我宣布，此次发射任务取得圆满成功。
The Shenzhou 21 astronauts will be working an extra month after being in the space station for more than half a year. They'll be testing technologies for prolonged human spaceflight and prepare to hand over their work to the next batch of crew. Now, time for some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. China's marriage registrations fell to the lowest level since 2020 for the first quarter of the year. South China Morning Post says nearly 1.7 million couples tied the knot, down 6% from the same time last year. China is already grappling with the falling birth rate and an aging population. Japan's Ibaraki Prefecture has launched a program to reward those who report businesses that hire illegal foreign workers. NHK says once details are verified, employers will be reported to the police. The local government says while labor shortages are a problem, the crackdown will help address human rights violations. And Yonhap News reports that North Korea is urging its people to intensify rice transplanting as the country grapples with food shortages. The process involves pulling up seedlings and replanting them into flooded fields to maximize yields. The transplanting phase typically wraps up by late May or early June. And still ahead on Asia tonight, here are some of the stories we're also going to be covering. Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte has been impeached by the House of Representatives for a second time. The impeachment complaint was backed by 255 out of 317 lawmakers. A guilty verdict will remove Ms. Duterte from office and ban her from politics for life. Plus, the number of infections from a cruise ship hantavirus outbreak could spike. An American and a French passenger evacuated from the vessel were among the latest to test positive. These stories and more on Asia Tonight, 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, right here on CNA. And on that note, we wrap up East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And look us up on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.